Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service offers tax preparation for individuals and businesses. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where tonight we're talking about a topic that we've actually featured on our show a couple times over the last 6 years: fetal alcohol syndrome and an organization called Healthy Brains for Children. My guest this evening is Jody Allen Crow, who actually appeared on our show before he became a national celebrity, because now he's been on Anderson Cooper, he's been on The Doctors, he's been in the New York Times, he's been on ABC, NBC, CBS, but you saw him first on Lakeland Public Television. So we're happy to have Jody back for the third time. Actually, it's been a number of years since you have been here, Jody, but it's good to have you back here again. You're really doing some very important work, and I think it's very worthwhile for us to talk about the topic that you're working on, also how this is starting to impact people from the United States and other countries, because you just came back from a trip to Lithuania.
Yes.
But let's just take a moment again and sort of, for people who may have not seen the shows that we've done earlier, talk about what is fetal alcohol syndrome and how is it impacting our children?
Well, fetal alcohol syndrome is the medical term for a damage that's caused by alcohol during a pregnancy that shows up in a physical deforming of the fetus. The term that's now used as much more of an umbrella term is called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, that describes not only the physical damage but the brain damage that occurs when you don't even see the physical damage. What happens is after about the first 18 days of a pregnancy, the fetus attaches to the umbilical, or onto the placenta, to the uterus, and all of the nutrients start feeding the fetus. It's an embryo at the time, from the mother. So anything that the mother has in her bloodstream is then transmitted directly to that embryo. And if there's any alcohol in that bloodstream, that alcohol acts as a what's called a teratogen. A teratogen comes from the Greek root word of monster, and a teratogen then starts to damage the fetus. A teratogen that many of us with gray hair remember is thalidomide. And thalidomide, when it was taken during the pregnancy, caused tremendous damage to the fetus. No arms, no legs, that sort of thing. Alcohol is in the same type of teratogenic field, and the damage that it starts to cause is in the brain, but it also can cause damage to the face, to the arms, to the legs, to the internal organs, etc. So starting at about 18 days of a pregnancy, the damage that may occur earlier than that, if there's alcohol, it may not allow the embryo or the zygote to actually connect to the uterus, and you'd have a spontaneous abortion of the embryo without it attaching. But once it attaches, any alcohol goes in and actually starts to cause problems. And if I can just kind of describe what happens, that embryo, very small, is kind of set up like this, and the alcohol comes in, it starts to kill the outer edges of that embryo. And that starts at about 18 days of a pregnancy. And between 18 and 22 to 24 days, that embryo starts to fold together, and this area here is the damaged areas, and that's parts of the face, the brain, and the heart of the developing embryo. So the damage starts very early. Many women don't even know they're pregnant, and they inadvertently drink alcohol and cause some of that damage. And then throughout the pregnancy, if there's alcohol drank at various times during the pregnancy, you'll see other damage that occurs physically and with the brain, all depending on how much alcohol is drank, for how long it's in the system, and when it's in the system. So the damage is not the same for any one of them. So there's no real template you can use for the damage that occurs.
I know we talked about this in our earlier shows. You had pictures of characteristics of kids who have been damaged by alcohol, and there are also many behavioral symptoms that have been displayed when when kids have been damaged by alcohol. I think that it's probably so important for people to understand what you've just said, that this happens at a very early stage. It could be a teenage girl who doesn't even know she's pregnant, and she can be drinking for a period of time, and the damage is done for life.
Yes.
And I know you also were doing some research into how many shooters in our nation's schools have come from families and distributed or displayed this sort of characteristic.
Right.
And that's how you got started in this business, isn't it?
It really was, because in my work, I worked on reservations for 18 years, and I saw so much of the damage firsthand being displayed in the school. And I call it behaviors, either social or academic behaviors, because you're, anything you do is a behavior. And I saw so much of that damage, and then I started seeing that same type of damage occurring with kids who were school shooters. And I studied and wrote a book called The Fatal Link, which was, I looked at the Minnesota and Wisconsin school shooters, and I actually went out and I talked to mothers. I talked to people that knew her when she was pregnant, interviewed people that worked with the kids, and I found irrefutable evidence in 4 out of the 5 adolescents who were school shooters in Minnesota and Wisconsin were heavily prenatally exposed to alcohol.
And you did a little study too, didn't you, on the Columbine shooting? Didn't you find
Yes,
some connection to one of the mothers there that had an alcohol problem?
I did. I call it 2 different types of studies. I did the micro study of Minnesota and Wisconsin, then a macro study looking more at probability of prenatal exposure to alcohol. And I determined that in the Columbine shooting, there were 2 shooters. One of them, the mother, one of them I determined that he did not fit the profile. But the other one I determined fit the profile, including having a physical characteristic, which is a body deformity that occurs in 37% of fetal alcohol syndrome kids, and that's either having a concave or a pigeon chest, and he had a concave chest. And he also had behaviors, including behaviors that caused him to be prescribed a psychotropic medication. And his mother fit the profile of a very high risk of drinking during a pregnancy. And he was born back in the time when we really didn't know much about fetal alcohol either. So there's a lot of those high risk factors for that mother. And after my book was published, I did get a letter from the mother who I determined did not fit the profile, and she confirmed that she did not even take medications or anything like that during her pregnancy. So I had one confirmation. The other one, a very close friend of Eric Harris's mother, actually called me and talked to me, and she did not dispute my contention. Her statement to me was, my husband was alcoholic, so we did not go out drinking with the Harrises. That was as close to a confirmation that I had, that Eric Harris's mother was alcohol involved, I would say. That's how. And it's not that women want this to happen to their child by any stretch of the imagination, and many of them drink before they even know they're pregnant, and that damage occurs. And then you see those higher behaviors like ADHD, impulse control issues, and behaviors that they have a hard time linking actions to consequences and that sort of thing.
And I know one of the things we talked about before was there's also this behavior that there seems to be no conscience about it. When they do something awful, there's not much remorse.
Right.
And that's a characteristic of this disease.
That's a brain injury. Let's use a politically correct word. It's an acquired brain injury behavior. The acquired brain injury is acquired during the fetal development. But if somebody, let's just say maybe a high-profile professional athlete, has his head, concussion, and pretty soon they're exhibiting these bizarre behaviors, which include violent behaviors, and we've seen this in professional wrestling and in other high-profile cases. Those are acquired brain injury behaviors because the part of the brain that manages that part of your awareness of your surrounding is damaged, and the brain can't manage like a normal brain can. Now these kids are damaged prior to birth, and I've had adoptive parents tell me that regardless of what we do, the outcome is still the same when they're working with really brain damaged children. They can provide all the structure around them And when they're in that structure and they have the supportive, what we call the seeing eye brain of another adult helping them through life, they're managing. But they get to a certain point in their life and they say, I don't want that anymore. They step outside of that structure and that seeing eye brain, and their life falls apart. And many of them fall into, adoptive parents say, the boys get locked up and the girls get knocked up. The boys get into violent behaviors or behaviors where they get they're naive to what's happening and unable to make good decisions, and they get pulled into criminal behaviors. And that happens so much. When I spoke to jail administrators recently, I spoke to 2 different conferences in Minnesota, and the jail administrators, after I got done speaking, they came up to me and several of them said, "You are right. About 90% of our inmates in our jail fit this profile."
Wow.
Because they're in the jail, they get out, they do the same thing, they're back in the jail, they get out, do the same thing, and they're back in jail. So it's just this recidivism with a brain that can't manage outside of a structured environment.
Wow, very interesting. Tell us what you've been doing,
Excuse me.
without us getting into a lot more detail about the symptoms themselves, because that's just a part of what we're talking about today. What is it that you've been doing since you were here last time?
Well,
I know you started a foundation called Healthy Brains for Children.
Yes.
Tell us how these fit together and what you're doing.
Well, it really is all about Brainerd. We started here in Brainerd. A very good friend of mine, Peter Johnson, he and I had sung together for many years. Ray, we did things together. Peter and I sat in his living room couch and said, what are we going to do? What's our legacy? We talked about Rhythm of the Rails, something that I've been involved in. And I said, Peter, I have to tell people about fetal alcohol. He says, I'm behind you. Let's do it. So Peter and I founded Healthy Brains for Children, and we're focused on prevention. And we say we're laser focused on prevention because that's the key to this. If we're going to really have some impact in the future, 5, 10, 15 years from now, we've got to be working on prevention. So we had the Rotary clubs, both the Brainerd morning and noon Rotary clubs, as well as the district, put in money together. And we had an event called Beginning the Journey here in Brainerd. It was an amazing event. We had Dr. Larry Bird from University of North Dakota come and speak. From that event, we started a chapter of Healthy Brains for Children, the Brainerd Lakes area chapter of Healthy Brains for Children. And since that time, this chapter has been doing things, an ongoing yearly events like Pregnant Ladies Night Out, where they invite pregnant ladies out and they distribute little door prizes and such, and then they talk about, alcohol during the pregnancy, and they do surveys, which we've actually found to be somewhat startling. Some of the results of the survey, the lack of information from the doctors about drinking. And we were encouraged that some of the doctors were talking to them, but we were also discouraged that not all of them were hearing that message. Then we also have this chapter has been increasingly doing things in the community, and I can get into that later, but we're developing what we call a Brainerd model because we're focused on developing something that's replicable in other communities using what we're doing here in Brainerd. Well, 2 years ago, I was living down in Mankato at the time, and we determined, Peter and I were talking about, what's our next step, and we put a pregnancy test dispenser in a woman's restroom in a bar in the Pub 500 in Mankato, Minnesota. Now that's an affluent bar in Mankato. University students, the affluent bar with the professors and that sort of thing. So we were really targeting that population of women who were having unexpected pregnancies. The highest risk factor for drinking during a pregnancy is a single white woman making more than $50,000 a year living in an urban setting.
Wow.
And that's what we targeted with this pregnancy test dispenser. And it was basically, think before you drink. Can you be pregnant? Test and see. Here it is, test. Well, within a day it was an international story. Within a week it was a #1 trending story on Yahoo. And when you mentioned Anderson Cooper, yes, Anderson Cooper called. The Doctor's TV show called.
And they called because this was such a unique idea, wasn't it?
Yes. And then articles were all over the place. We had people from Russia calling us, South America. We were seeing articles all over the world. it was very exciting, but it blew us out of the water. We didn't know what are we going to do next? Well, within a year, unfortunately, in the following year, my friend Peter passed away, and it was shortly after he passed away that I got a call from Alaska. And Alaska, people in Alaska had heard about this initiative, and they have since then contracted with me to help them with their Empowering Hope initiative, where the government has appropriated $400,000 to do a study in Alaska looking at 20 free vend dispensers, where the state is going to purchase the dispensers and purchase the tests, and a woman can literally go into a restroom of a bar and push a button and get a pregnancy test. Wow. And they all have prevention messages on them too, and the dispenser does. So they're looking at how do we impact fetal alcohol in our state. I've also been approached by Alberta to have them, their Liquor and Gaming Commission, make it a requirement to have all their Class 1 bars have dispensers in their bars. I think they're watching the Alaska initiative to see how that turns out, and then they'll be able to, with the study and the results of the study, they'll be able to then have some empirical data to say this is what we need to do in our province as well. So that happened, and then I got a call to speak at the first international conference on preventing FASD in Edmonton, Alberta, and that was an amazing experience. I found that our little organization, Healthy Brains for Children, was the only organization anywhere that was actually doing something outside of just awareness type of things for preventing fetal alcohol.
I know there are some hospitals, like in where I live, that has a program now that's focusing on that. Mm-hmm. But they certainly were doing it after some of the things that you started doing a number of years ago.
Yeah.
So when you did the pregnancy test in bars, that's what really caught the attention of the national media, wasn't it?
Yes.
And did they have follow-up questions about what could they do to help? Did any of them, or were they just reporting what they had heard?
There were some. There wasn't anybody saying, "What can we do to help?" It was all just so. Oh, this is just amazing. This is brilliant. This is, and then I got some of the crank ones too. Giving me a hard time about it. But even giving me a hard time about it, we were getting the message out, and
Sure.
we were talking about it. We were having this discussion about this unexpected pregnancy and the damage that can occur during the unexpected pregnancies, because most of the effort on prevention is on chronic alcoholic women and trying to not have 3 and 4 and 5 children if they know they've already had 1 or 2 that's had fetal alcohol. And I was focusing on this unexpected pregnancy. I immediately got a call from a researcher out of University of California, San Diego, one of the premier researchers, wanting to do a study on this. So I'm actually, since that point in time, I've been rubbing elbows with people that are the heavyweights in the field of fetal alcohol. And I've actually become, I'm on a first name basis with them, which never would have occurred if that hadn't happened. Mm-hmm. But then after, there was another thing that had occurred 4 years ago in my life. I'd met a woman who had drank heavily through her first pregnancy. During her second pregnancy, the social services came to her and said, "You've been neglecting your first child, and you're out in the bars. You either are going to be on a 4-time-a-day phone-in breathalyzer, or we're going to put you into residential treatment." And she went on a 4-time-a-day breathalyzer with a big, bulky breathalyzer sitting on her kitchen table. But she told me, "I haven't drank since. And I didn't drink during the rest of my pregnancy with my child." And I thought, how can we make that happen for all of our pregnant women who are alcohol involved? Well, now the technology is advanced to the point where I found this company, it's called SoberLink, that has a monitored breathalyzer that's used for, DWIs and that sort of thing. I thought, well, why don't we use that for alcohol-involved pregnancies? So we developed a program that started here in Brainerd. It's already going. It's amazing. It has people from national levels looking at it going, "You've got to get research grants on this because we want this everywhere." It's literally using incentivized breathalyzers that we have a client that comes to us, and I don't know the names, it's just a number, and they come to us and they've been identified as being pregnant and drinking alcohol. And we get them into the program, and for every negative test throughout the remainder of their pregnancy, they get an incentive. And it has been amazingly successful. and we can say they're not drinking during their pregnancy for the remainder of their pregnancy. Whereas before, all we could do is assume that they were telling some counselor the truth. There was no way to know when they would go home, and nobody was accounting for it. So we're very encouraged with what we're seeing there. And we really encourage anybody in the Crow Wing County area, if you know a teenage girl who's pregnant who's drinking alcohol, to contact us and encourage that teenager to come to us. So why are we targeting teenagers? Well, it's illegal to drink alcohol when you're a teenager. When you're 21, 22, 23, it's not illegal to drink alcohol. And the only reason that the social services could get involved with a 22 or 23-year-old is if they are drinking alcohol in excess or habitually. Whereas a teenager, if they got caught, maybe we've actually had one who was caught and ticketed for being involved in an alcohol-related incident as a teenager, and we're working with the government officials, and that's a condition of her probation. Yeah.
So, is there any safe level of drinking when a mother's pregnant?
There is. The Surgeon General of the U.S. states there is no known safe level of alcohol during a pregnancy. The reason I maintain that is that if somebody were to say, well, you could have a drink or two, it's not going to hurt. Well, how do you define a drink? One Long Island tea could be one drink. Well, that might have 5 shots of alcohol in it in one drink, and that would actually be considered a binge with 5 shots of alcohol. Wow. So people have to be very cautious in saying, oh, you can drink moderately. No, alcohol is a teratogen. And what I say to people is, any drink that a pregnant woman holds in her hand has the potential to take potential away from that child. And that's what we have to think about. Think about the potential of the children. And we don't want to take any potential away from that child. We want that child to have the best life they can. As an educator, I have seen so many kids who have lost that potential, and it's something they can't gain back.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
Now, I know you just came back from Lithuania. Tell us about how that developed and that experience, because that must be very rewarding to be able to speak to organizations like you did when you went to another country.
It was amazing. I had spoken up in Alberta, and it was an amazing experience up in Alberta. And I got back, and about a week later, I get this email from a psychiatrist who's at the university in Vilnius in Lithuania. That's the capital. And his name is Aurelius Varega. And he said in his email, he said, I read your book as I flew back home. He said, there's only been 2 books in my life that have changed the way I think, and yours is one of them. Can we translate it into Lithuanian so I can get it to my colleagues, to other doctors across Lithuania, to people who are working with fetal alcohol kids, and to others? And it was like an amazing opportunity. So, of course, I worked with them, and he had a group of medical students in his university then that helped translate the book. And then they invited me over to speak at the first, at the first Baltic States Conference on preventing fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So that includes Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So I was able to go over there a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. I'll tell you what, I'd never traveled and been 8 hours out of sync. Oh, what an experience there. But it was amazing, and I was able to, the other amazing part about it, excuse me, is that I was at the same table as the director of the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and the international coordinator for the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and the #1 researcher, Dr. Ed Riley. And I spent 3 days with them. And they were very encouraged by what I was doing and wanted to make sure I applied for grants from the NIAAA to continue the work that I'm doing in prevention. So there was a kind of a byproduct of the trip over there. But it was amazing to talk to people in Lithuania who are, excuse me, this is a byproduct of it too, this cold I got from the travel. But amazing to talk to these people that had no clue about the damage from prenatal exposure to alcohol until this Dr. Varegas went over to this conference in Canada. And now their learning curve is so steep and they're so eager to do something. Lithuania's got the third highest rate of drinking in all the European nations. Wow. And they're very concerned about the effect of alcohol in their system. and Dr. Varega talked about these increasing numbers of kids that are having all these problems in schools. And when he read my book, he understood that could be the root cause of most of those problems that they're seeing in schools. Wow.
Well, we're running short on time. Could you tell us a little bit about if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Okay. Just go to our website, healthybrainsforchildren.org. Personally, you can just put in Jody Allen Crow at healthybrainsforchildren.org. We accept donations. In fact, we're looking for donations to continue the My Baby's Breath in the Brainerd Lakes area, because we're funding the whole program, and we have enough for at least three My Baby's Breath breathalyzers to be going at once. But the county has told us that we might have the need to have up to 10 going at once. And if we could impact 10 babies a year in our county, what an amazing thing that would be happening here in Crow Wing County.
Well, I just think it's great, Jody, that you're spending a big part of your life trying to prevent the damage and the disruption that is caused by alcohol in so many people's lives. And I give you a lot of credit for doing that. That's a great job that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ray.
You bet.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You bet. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.